Hey guys, hope you all are doing amazing tonight. We're going to jump right in here and we're going to start this new series called on the doctrine of man. And in this series, we're going to focus on what a biblical view of humankind really looks like. And specifically in this lesson, we're going to dive in and focus on the fact that when we were actually made, we were made in the very image of God. We're going to focus on how God himself defines us as human beings, and we'll discover how being created in the image of God impacts our value as human beings. So let's dive in here in Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 is where we're going to be, and we're going to start in verse 26 here in just a minute. We're going to look at a few important truths about being made in the image of God, and then discover how that should impact our view of ourselves and then our view of those people who are around us. So if we're there in Genesis chapter number 1, let's start in verse 26 and we'll read to verse 27. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and every other creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. That's a pretty amazing thought, right? That God chose to create humankind in his image. We are not accidents, right? God made us to be like him on purpose. If you hear nothing else for the rest of this lesson, let that thought sink in your head. So we just said it, but point number 1 here is God purposefully chose to create humankind in his image. It's pretty encouraging to note that God made human beings in a special way that was different from all the rest of his creation, right? Like, if you remember, everything before this, God created with his words, right? In Genesis 1, verse 3, God literally spoke and said, "Let there be light," and there was light. That's just kind of how that worked. But then there was something different here with Adam. And when he created man, God didn't speak him into existence. God formed him from the dirt, and then he breathed life into his nostrils, right? In Genesis chapter 2, verse number 7, it says right there, "And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." God created everything else with words, but then he sculpted the beauty of man with his breath. He brought him to life. He breathed into the man the breath of life, and man became a living thing. What attention to detail, what special care. In fact, God called all the rest of his creation good, but then when he finished creating man, he said that man was very good. I'm sure you all have heard that before, but that's a really awesome little detail right there, a difference between man and the rest of his creation. Because we are created in his image and are of special value to God. Being made in God's image speaks to the high importance God placed on human beings. We have intrinsic value that comes from God himself. So letter A, we have intrinsic value. As a human made in the image of God, our value comes from the fact that God values us, right? God has assigned to you value. You are who God says you are. A valuable creation designed by the divine designer. So I have with me, it's a $20 bill, right? I'm kind of broke, so this is like the biggest bill that I have. So just for illustration, I'm going to use this $20 bill. And so this $20 bill is worth $20, right? I mean, that's just kind of straightforward. It's kind of common knowledge, right? That a $20 bill would be worth $20. But if I was going to give this $100 bill away to someone tonight, you'd probably want to have it, right? It's $20. Why would you want it? Isn't it just a piece of paper printed out with like a fancy design. It's got like a guy's face on it, and it's got a building on the other side, right? It's nothing fancy. It's just a piece of paper, right? No, it has value because it was assigned that value by the people who created this bill, right? It has its value has been assigned by its maker. It is so valuable that I'm not going to give it away. I couldn't even give it away if I wanted to because I'm not there. But if I was, I need this, so I'm going to keep it. But you have been assigned value too, except you're so much more valuable than a $20 bill, right? Like that's amazing, right? Because God assigned you value. So while we are all made in the image of God and have intrinsic value, we also are all unique. God didn't create a bunch of little robotic clones, like all made after each other, all the same, all made like exactly the same. We have each been given a unique design by God. So letter B, we have a unique design. And as humans, we are unique both as a group and also as individuals. So first, let's talk about number one here, collective uniqueness, or uniqueness like all of humankind are unique from the rest of God's creation. We've already kind of talked about it, but in verse number 20, in Genesis 1, verse number 26, the verse that we started with, it says, "And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." And so, God has given man the ability to rule over all of creation. So he's given us a higher standard than the creation, right? Like the fish don't rule over mankind. The birds of the air don't rule over mankind. Mankind is like above everything else. Mankind is actually given the authority to rule over all the rest of God's creation, right? That's so awesome to really think about. And he was created differently, right? We've already talked about that a little bit. But at the end of verse number in Genesis 2, at the end of verse number 7, it says, "And man became a living soul." It doesn't talk about that in any of the rest of God's creation, right? So we're also different in that we are alive and have a soul, right? I'm sure you all have heard that before, but it's such an awesome thought to really think about. In 1 Corinthians, verse number 39, and Paul is talking about it too. And he uses the phrase here in verse number 39. It says, "All flesh is not the same flesh, but there is one kind of flesh of men, and another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, and another of birds." That's basically like Paul saying here, like, hey, the flesh, the meat of human beings is not the same thing as the flesh of a cow or a bird or a fish, right? That's basically what it just said here. And then Paul also says here in Romans 2, verse 15, that we were built with a moral and mental ability that is distinct among all of the rest of creation. God has placed a moral compass inside of us. He has written his law in our hearts. We know what the difference is between right and wrong, right? Like animals don't necessarily have that. They can't be like, "Oh, I just killed something. I just killed that other animal. Like that's bad." No, animals don't think through that, right? But we have a moral compass inside of us. We know what's right and wrong. God has given humans the ability to have free will and to be creative. In the beginning, God gave Adam and Eve the freedom to live in the garden and eat whatever they wanted, except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What was their response, though? We all know this, right? They chose evil. Unfortunately, we often find ourselves in a similar situation to Adam and Eve, as we are prone to choose sin. Human beings know right from wrong and can choose. We are also unique in the fact that even after our bodies die, we continue to exist, right? That's so awesome. Death is not the end for humans. As a soul, we will live eternity either with God or we'll live eternity apart from God. But the uniqueness is bigger than just that. Humankind is different from the rest of all of creation, but individually, our uniqueness is even more so, right? Everyone has hands, right? I hope so. Everyone listening to this would have hands. So if you look at your hands and you look at your fingertips, right, there's going to be fingerprints. It's pretty common knowledge, right? But it's awesome because every single person in the entire world does not have the same fingerprints. Any person who's ever lived, any person who lives now or is yet to come will always have, none of them will ever have fingerprints that another person has had. Even identical twins have different fingerprints. You have unique fingerprints from God that nobody else has. God knows you intimately, values you tremendously, and has made you uniquely. Would you, so in Psalms 139, verse 13, it says, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made." You have a special story that has been written specifically by God. Have you ever thought about what your story is? Where did it start? What's your name? What's your personality? What is your ethnicity or culture? What have been significant events that have shaped you? If we go around the room tonight, which we don't have time to, but if we did, I'd probably guess that nobody would have the exact same story of what's happened in their lives, right? And each story has been designed and directed by God according to His plan, because we are designed by the divine designer. Therefore, every story matters to God. Your story matters to God. The unfortunate news is that if we look around, we can tell that sin has distorted the image of God. Sin has caused us all to have to deal with difficulties in our story. It's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows our entire story, right? For some of us, those difficulties are extreme, but they don't necessarily define you. God defines you. So, since we are purposefully created in the image of God and have been ascribed great value by God, we must choose to purposefully value those created in the image of God. So number 2, we must purposely choose to value humankind. There's been much conversation recently in culture about race and who matters, right? Like the whole Black Lives Matter thing that has been going on for the past few years, right? But from the creation of man, God settled the matter of who matters. If we go back to Genesis 1:26, where we first started, it says, all humankind has its origin from God. They are created in the image of God, and they are all valuable to God. No matter who they are, where they've come from, they've all been made specifically by God. The writer of the book of Acts was a man named Luke. Luke was a doctor, and he's described the human race as one blood, one race, all created in the image of God in Acts 17, verse number 26. It's no wonder that the Bible says in John 3:16 that God so loved the world, and that Jesus tells us to love one another in John 13. In light of such love, we must purposefully choose to value humankind because we are all designed by the divine designer. The way we think about, talk about, and treat others should reflect the fact that they are valuable, because we are also created in the image of God. We must see ourselves and other people around us the way that God sees us. Every life is valuable to God. Every life deserves respect. Anytime you or I treat someone who is created in the image of God with disrespect, including ourselves, we are disrespecting the divine designer. We are distorting the value of a valuable design. To describe it in biblical terms, we are sinning against a holy God. And that is the universal problem of humankind. Sin. Everyone has sinned. As a result of sin, human beings who were made in the image of God are dehumanized and treated as worthless by other human beings. We fall short of God's glory and let our value of others fall short of God's standard of love. We all sin. Every person who's created in the image of God needs redemption from sin. And when God chose to provide a solution for man's sin problem, do you know how he did it? To those created in the image of God, he sent the one who is the very image of God. He sent Jesus. The divine designer became the righteous redeemer. The one who is the very image of God made a way for those who were created in the image of God to be free from sin. Jesus died for you on the cross and then defeated death when he rose from the dead on the third day, right? How we just celebrated that just on this past Sunday, right? It's an awesome thought to remember. Although your value as a person was determined at creation, because of Jesus' sacrificial death, your value was confirmed at the cross. So choose to value others. Letter A, choose to value others. How in the world could we ever justify treating anyone with disrespect? As we've been saying, we're all designed by a divine designer. Our sin has been paid for by the righteous Redeemer. God has expressed his great love for us. It's time for us to extend that great love to others. If we will see people, all people, how God sees people, it'll change the way that we treat people. Jesus said it like this: "As I have loved you, you also love one another." Why should we love one another? Because God made everyone in his image. Because we are designed by the divine designer. Being designed by a divine designer means that we deserve to be treated with dignity. So we are all worthy to be treated with love because you are made in the image of God. But it's not always that easy to just say that, right? It might be easy to love your best friend or sometimes your siblings, right? But it's also really, really hard to love and care for that person who sits alone at lunch, or it's just kind of a little bit weird, right? Like, we don't always automatically get drawn to that person, or maybe they're just like a little bit annoying. Maybe they talk a lot and it's just really hard to like be with them because you're just like exhausted all the time trying to talk to them or something like that, right? Yes, even they are created in the image of God. And yes, God so loved them too. Even when we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Remember, all are worthy of being treated with love because all people are made in the image of God. All people are designed by a divine designer. But the fact that we were designed by a divine designer should also impact our view of ourselves. So letter B, choose to value ourselves. Why in the world should we ever believe or let someone else make us believe that we are less valuable than the value God has placed on us? If we will see ourselves for how God sees us, it will change the way we think about and treat ourselves, right? Like, see, remember this $20 bill? If I like crinkled it all up, if I like made it into a little ball and tossed it in the trash and did whatever, got wet or whatever it might be, and I pulled it out, would it have lost its value? Can I like no longer spend it because it got crumpled up or because it got like a little bit wet? No, not at all. Not one single bit. If I wrinkled it up and then like just unwrinkled it, then I could still spend it. I could still use it for its value. It never, ever lost its value. Well, we all have a unique life story, and while some of those stories involve deep hurt and disappointment and sin and whatever it may be, your story doesn't determine your value. God has already determined your value, and Jesus Christ confirmed your value when he died for you. So, we have a choice tonight. Will you choose to view others how God views them? Will you stand up for the dignity of other people, no matter their skin color, or cultural background, or home life, or just however they might act, or however they might be? Will you choose to see them as valuable? Will you choose to believe what is true about you? You are made in the image of God. You are valued because you were made by God. You are beautiful. You are beautifully designed. Will you choose to see yourself for how God sees you?